Welcome to The Long Haul, the podcast dedicated to empowering small carriers and owner-operators to drive their business forward. I'm your host, Adam Wingfield, bringing you insights from industry leaders, real-world success stories, and strategies to help you navigate the road to profitability. Whether you're just getting started or looking to take your fleet to the next level, this is the show where trucking meets opportunity. So buckle up, it's time to go the distance. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Long Haul. You know, we love to get in and roll our sleeves up and give you some actual insight from people that are out there that are managing it day to day. And today I have a very, very special guest on the show today. Today's show is about efficiency, 100% efficiency. And one of the biggest things that we talk about from a trucking perspective, it's not about what you make, it's about what you keep. Efficiency is so important in this industry with the margins set the way they are. We want to make sure that we provide you with actionable insights that you can follow up, follow through, and be able to execute on your end. Before we go any further, I want to make sure you do me a favor. I want you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast out. Make sure we get the word out. We want to bring all awareness to improving our trucking businesses as we go forward. Today, I want to really peel the onion back on being more efficient out there. And I couldn't think of a better guest to bring onto the show. The guest I have today is the owner operator of Hellbent Express. Which is a South Dakota-based trucking company. He's a girl dad of 5. He's been in the trucking industry for quite some time. I've seen him in a variety of different places, been following his journey for quite some time. And I'm super excited to bring him on the podcast today because he truly exemplifies when it comes to efficiencies. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Jamie Hagen. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. How you doing?
Special guest. I don't feel special.
I beg to differ.
Just an ordinary guy.
Well, Mr. Ordinary, I appreciate you coming out here and spending time with the Long Haul family today. Take us back. Let's go back. Before I go forward, I want to go all the way back. I want to go back to the beginning. I want to go back to your journey. What got you interested in getting to this wild west we call the trucking industry?
Well, I was kind of born into it. My dad and my uncle were truckers back in the 70s and 80s, so I kind of grew up in a truck. So I've always been around the trucking industry my entire life. So it just seemed natural when the time come. I became an adult. I had needed something to do. My passion was trucks, so I just jumped right in a big rig. I've had my CDL since I was 18, so it's all I've really done with my life, really.
Where you from? Is this from North Dakota, South Dakota?
Aberdeen, South Dakota. Don't ugly it up with North Dakota. Ooh,
a big difference.
There, ugly sister.
Aberdeen, South Dakota. So you got your CDL at 18. Tell me, that's a little different from what you hear that going about. Is some of the requirements is that they're pushing for change, and you got your CDL at 18. Tell us about that experience.
Well, the crazy part is I actually had already been driving for 2 years prior to that. South Dakota didn't have a CDL law prior to 1992. So I was able to drive with just a regular South Dakota driver's license in the state of South Dakota only. But I had a couple of years of experience when they finally went to the CDL law, so I was able to grandfather in. I've actually never taken a driving test in my life. All I did was fill out the application and they gave me one. Luckily, it worked out good for me because I was a good driver. Looking back now, when you have your father there to mentor you the whole way, and he's been driving for decades, that's a huge difference. I love the idea of having kids in the industry now because it hooked me early. It got me on the path of driving a truck. I think it's a great idea to get people of that 18 and 19, 20 years old, get them in the industry, get them teaching how to drive, and then when they can go over the road like long haul, they've got experience instead of just coming into the industry fresh and learning the whole enchilada.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And that's always going to be one of those things, especially nowadays, one of those things that's always going to be a debatable item is whether or not that would be a appropriate age. Because one of the things that, you and I can talk back, we didn't have those distractions that are in the cab now as back then. Whether it's a cell phone, whether it's tablets, whether it's ELDs, all of those things could register themselves as a distraction, and we can always talk about that. So, but that's a great point, though, and it's exciting to see that journey started off back then as a kid, and then you went to the 18. Now, progress me a little bit. Tell me about your first driving job. You got your CDL. Take me through that first driving job that you had. What was that like?
Well, yeah, I mean, we started driving for my dad. We had a farm, and so we were just doing like custom haying and hauling hay bales all over the state, and then eventually out of state. When I turned 21, like any young man who had a passion for it, I didn't want to be held back by my 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 dad. I wanted to go out and strike out on my own. So anyone around in the 90s knew that Freightliner wanted a huge market share, so they were willing to finance. Mercedes-Benz at the time was willing to finance anybody on a truck. I mean, I walked in 21 years old with a few $1,000s in my pocket, and they said, "Here's the truck." They just didn't hardly question it. It was crazy compared to today's market where you've got to fill out all kinds of forms. Like I left with a used Freightliner back in 95. Um, so quickly struck out on my own and failed. Within a few years, I was out of the business. I shouldn't say out of the business, out of business. The truck I sold was able to get out of it and started as a company driver for Cliff Viessmann Incorporated out of Gary, South Dakota. And I'd stuck with them for, what would that be, 12 years before I started, uh, struck out again as an owner back in 2010.
So take me back to, you got your CDL, 18 years old. Then, hey, it's time to go out and get a real job, get a company job. You started driving for your dad doing hail bays. Walk me through that process a little bit on what that looked like as you progress in that early years of being a CDL owner.
Well, I started, like I said, driving with my dad, doing hay bales around the area, but that quickly grew. I outgrew that and I wanted to go over the road. I wanted to do flatbed with the big time. So I went out and bought my own truck. Like I said, Mercedes Benz was financing anybody and everybody on a Freightliner. So I ran out and with a few $1,000s down, got myself a used truck and was able to get out there, leased to a company called SMX, Smithway Motor Express, which is now Western Express. Worked for them for a few years until eventually I ran myself out of business. I didn't know enough to how to save money and how to do things. When you're a kid, you're 23 years old. Saving money isn't exactly at the top of your list. It's getting wild and drinking and all those good things. Um, but I ended up selling the truck and going to work as a company driver for a company called Cliff Viessmann Incorporated out of Gary, South Dakota, where I really learned a lot from those guys on how to pinch a penny. As a company driver, I would always sit there and wouldn't understand why they would always be so cheap on things. But I learned a lot. Like you can get by with a lot in this industry without throwing money away. Uh, you know, just to sit back and see some of the things they did, like looking back now as a guy, I understand now as a fleet owner more of how they did things. But in 2010, I decided I wanted to try it again. So I bought another truck, a used truck. The market had already crashed, by 2008. So used trucks were just ridiculously cheap out there. I went out and got one, leased it back on to Cliff Eastman, and was leased to them until this last year. At one point I had 5 trucks with them, and then we, struck out on our own too with Hellbent Express in 2020.
So you went through the process. Hey, you know what? I failed that first time. Went on, got my sleeves up on it, worked up under the company, learned some of the intricacies and the day to days that they did from an efficiency standpoint, and learned how important it was to say, you know what, a dollar saved is a dollar earned, and you really really drove that into what you did. Then you went to and became a lease operator, put 5 trucks on that to a company. What really was that kind of turning moment? Because I tell you what, that Hellbent Express, that name, the logo is absolutely incredible. What was the turning moment for you that made you just kind of just flip the switch and say, you know what, I'm going all in on this. I believe in my vision and I'm gonna go all in on it because you come from a family of truckers. and it doesn't look like he was going to shake it at all. What made you just continue to say, you know what, it's my turn now? What made you make that decision?
I don't know. Maybe I'm just uh, too stupid to not know any better, I guess, in the sense like I just had a passion for trucks and I loved everything about trucks. Now, even the business side of trucks, I fell in love with, like just everything about it, just all the knowledge I could gain. I felt like a sponge everywhere I went. I was asking people questions and I wanted to do something different. You know, being a company driver and driving all these years, it always felt like there was something missing in the industry, and I didn't understand why. So when I created Hellbent Express, leaving the leased operator world to complete independent world, I quickly learned the difficulties. You know, you're sheltered as a leased operator. When you're completely on your own, there's all these different nuances in compliance and just finding your own customers. All those things are just it's way more complex and it's challenging. For me, it's always been a challenge. I love being challenged by things. I might not like it sometimes, you know what I mean? Like sometimes you get kicked in the face a few times, but I love getting kicked, I guess.
Well, I mean, so that's part of the entrepreneurship journey. It's almost like golfing. I hate golfing, and I'm not a golfing type person, but you go out there and you can shank, 100 shots out there, and all it takes is that one to be like, you know what, this ain't that bad after all. And that's kind of how it feels like sometimes when it comes down to trucking. Actually, all the time when it comes down to trucking itself. Now, I want to just take a minute I'm going to skip back just real quick so I can skip ahead. And the reason why I want to skip back is because you mentioned that you failed. You mentioned like, hey, you know what, I was making stupid decisions from a business perspective. Talk to me about those decisions that weren't the wisest choices that you were making, and as a young entrepreneur back when you started.
Oh, I didn't prioritize maintenance. I didn't, I was big on fuel efficiency then. I knew slowing down was your biggest advantage, especially in open deck. The less aerodynamic you are, So I had that going for me, but it was just money management. Making sure you had cash flow. You have a really good month, hang on to that money because next month it's not going to be good. That's almost a guarantee in trucking. It is such a, they say the freight market is like a roller coaster, but a trucking company in itself is its own little roller coaster within that. So one month, and it just takes a really bad month when you haven't saved to put you out of business. And that's essentially what happened. Things slowed down just a little bit, rates dipped a little bit, and suddenly I couldn't afford to buy tires anymore. I couldn't afford to buy those little things that you should have money saved up for. And that was immediately as soon as I restarted Hellbent Express, I don't buy frivolous things. I make sure that the money's in the bank so when we need stuff that's important, you know, that's that's where we spend our money on the things that matter, our people, our equipment.
Do you feel like when hey, I made a mistake, failed that first time, then I went and I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a try again, but this time I'm going to be a lease operator. Did you feel like at that time that was kind of like saying, hey, I want to ride the bike again, but this time I want to put some training wheels on the side of it? Would ultimately I'm going to leave and become my own, or what was the decision behind not just saying, hey, I'm just going to do this again. I'm going to try again. I'm smarter now. What was the decision making process like that?
It was training wheels. That's a good metaphor to put that into. I wanted to learn how to operate the truck extremely efficiently, and then I wanted to try it a second time. The hardest leap really is the second truck. It isn't to get to 10 trucks. I mean, that's still difficult, but to get to two is actually the bigger task because now you have to accept certain things that change, having to do payroll and having to do for somebody else and do for yourself at the same time. Like that was a huge grip, but doing it underneath a company that was handling all those back office things for me was helping me learn how to do payroll and all those things that I had to do and how to manage people. So once I decided to strike out on my own, I felt like I had a really good grip on that aspect already. So once we struck out on our own, I quickly learned then too that I couldn't do it all on my own. Like I couldn't do all of that and the back office. I couldn't be at two places at one time. That's when I hired, my wife to help in the office, which was a huge, I mean, if I had to put a pin on anything that really excelled us, it was having her behind us.
That was a beautiful thing, and she does an amazing job. Just really kind of pushing the brand and the business, and and the back office part, like you said, is so critical, and from a component perspective. And when I think about that, so we decided to go with Hellbent Express, and we said, hey, you know what, we're going to go all in. We're at two. What decisions were behind that thought process as you began to scale the company? Did you scale it based on, hey, you know what? I've got I've got a good residual amount of spot freight. Do I have a customer in place? What makes you decide to say, you know what, I'm going to start moving up and start moving this truck count up the ladder?
The decision there was simply because I could get trucks. I wanted to grow because I wanted to get out of the truck to some degree. I wanted more free time I still want to drive, but I didn't want to work, the amount that I want, that was to support the business with just me. So I thought if we got to five, six, seven, eight, just kept kind of adding. My relationship with Mac lent itself to being able to get new trucks when nobody else could during COVID. Remember in 20 and 21 and 22, it was hard to get trucks. So I could still leverage my relationship and get trucks, add them. And then once we got to a certain size, we were able to reach out to, leaving the spot market, going to not only shippers, but to some brokerages that now send us, they don't even, those loads never go to the load board. They simply go straight to us. So being of a certain size lends itself to that for sure. Like when I just had a customer reach out to me yesterday, they got some freight that they want, 8 loads moved within 3 days. And I'm like, well, I think we can handle it. And they're paying us quite handsomely for it. So that's one of the reasons to scale up, and I hope to actually scale up just a few more even and just kind of stay out there.
Well, based on your direction and where you're going, I can pretty much say that that's going to probably be something that's going to be in your very very near future. I want to talk a little bit about the decision to go with Mack trucks, right? So, yeah, obviously your first truck was a Freightliner, right? Your first truck was a Freightliner. What in the world made you decide to go with the Mack truck? Not saying anything bad or good. Just I want to hear your thought process. Talk to me about the thought process behind it.
It wasn't because I had a great fondness for Mac or anything like that, which a lot of people do because it's so Americana, right? Like it's so this country, Mac built the United States if you think about it. But my situation came from when I was a company driver, they gave me a Volvo truck that I actually loved. I thought the powertrain was great. Struck out on my own, I bought a used Volvo. One thing I'd never really cared for it was just the cab design. It just always felt like it didn't fit. Um, it's kind of a weird design how they had their dash way lower, and it just didn't feel like the American truck that we all grew up with. So when I found out that Mac was actually owned by Volvo Group and you could get the same powertrain in a Mac, that opened my eyes. Went and looked at their stuff, and that's when I really fell in love with Mac. Because now I had this great powertrain in a truck that was made here in America, that was designed, here in America, and it had that layout that I wanted. It had great aerodynamics. One thing you'll never hear from Volvo is that Mac always had the better aerodynamic package, but they don't advertise that. So there again, an efficiency that I learned about, and that's what kind of sold me on it. Once I became a Mac owner, what really, really drove it home is they have a smaller dealership network. They have a vast, large dealership network, but they're made up of small dealers that have been there for decades and decades. And you don't see large fleets buy Mac. What you see are owner operators on small fleets. So they know how to cater to us. And that is what really sold me on them. That's why we stick with them today. I can call a Mac dealership. Now, granted, there's a few of them that are really huge, you know, dealerships, but most of them are small. I can call them and be like, hey, I got a truck with a problem. Can I bring it in? And they're like, yeah, stop on in. You know, you go to some of these other large dealerships and they're like, hey, we're a week out. Can you leave your truck here for a week? That's that's killer when you're a small fleet. You can't leave a truck for a week.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely spot on. And what I'll tell you too is that, and I love the fact that you picked a, hey, I picked a relationship. So you built a relationship with Mac. I picked a relationship that worked best for me, and then you found equipment that worked best for your fleet. Today we're talking about efficiency, and one of the things that you can pretty much say is that Mack trucks are pretty spot on when it comes to amongst the top when it comes to fuel efficiency in truck. Was that part of the decision, or is that something that you saw a benefit as you started beginning to add more Mack trucks on comparison to what's out there?
That was the very first consideration, really, is the extreme level of efficiency that they offer. Uh, Mac is known for its customization, so you can go in and you can spec one any way you want it to. You can have it be aggressive with high horsepower, or you can get it with uh, extreme efficiency. The other thing that I love about it too was the open mindedness of the dealership network to spec what you wanted. Sometimes you don't get that.
Here's the thing though. So you come from, generations of trucking, right? And you know what? It's not always that fun to be in that right lane. It's not always be that fun to think about the fuel efficiency standpoint, right? Where did that come at? When did you decide, I'm gonna be this guy over here in the right lane with a fuel efficient truck versus be over there on the other lane and just kind of just moving as the wind blows?
Right, that is definitely different from what most people are used to. Right, these guys that are been in trucking for generations typically have a different mentality. Right. No, mine came from being, losing everything. You lose everything once. Never went bankrupt, but I lost everything. And that'll teach you some hard lessons and it'll humble you. So I didn't want to ever go back. I don't ever want to lose everything. There might come a day where I sell everything, but I don't want to lose it. So that keeps me humble. The other thing is I always gamify my fuel economy. I'm always trying to get it better. There's times I'll drive 55 to really get it in the double digits. And that's what makes me happy. Where some guys are really happy, doing triple digits on their miles per hour. You know what I mean? Like they'd be happy doing 100 miles an hour if they could. Where I'm just as happy as pie. And you know what? I hate to say it, but it's less stressful. Your day is so calm when everybody's passing you on the left instead of you passing everybody on the left. I spend most of my days at the end of the night. I'm calm and relaxed, and I'm ready for the next day. Versus being some of these drivers you see, they're really on edge, and when you can hear them when they talk to you, they seem on edge. They, you know what I mean? Like they're all jacked up, and they're just frustrated with life. And I'm like, yeah, did you spend all day zipping in and out of traffic? And yeah,
Well, one of the things too that you hear about all the time. So you think about the difference between, you going down 75, 80 miles, 85 miles an hour, you might get five and a half, 6.5, 6 miles an hour, miles per gallon on that efficiency wise. If you're doing 100,000 miles a year, the difference between 5.5, 6 miles per gallon and getting 8.5 on a regular, it's thousands of gallons of fuel. We're talking about a difference of, at that rate, you're probably doing 16, 17 gallons, 1,000 gallons a year versus 12, 1,000 gallons a year. That's a huge difference when it comes down to fuel efficiency. But one of the biggest arguments that you'll get and the biggest pushback that you'll get, Jamie, is, well, I won't be able to make it to my destination on time if I'm doing 55 miles an hour, right? You hear that all the time. What would you say to address that?
well, I would never miss an appointment. I'll say that. There's times where I've got to drive faster. My truck is geared such that I have three operating gears. I have an overdrive, a direct drive, and an underdrive that I can use at any given time at highway speed. So uh, if I need to drive 75 miles an hour, I can do that and I can do it efficiently. I can still be in 8 miles a gallon at 75 miles an hour, but I can be in 10s and 11s if I, bring my speed down and run it in direct. So it's having the right equipment to do that. But I also plan, it's to me, it's crazy to say this. I wasn't the best student growing up. Math was not my strong suit, but for whatever reason, I can look at a logbook and, you know, tell what I need to do next, how I can plan the next one, how I can do, whether it be an 8-2 split or a 7-3 split, or how much I need to average the next day, what kind of traffic flow I'm going to have the next day. Like, I imagine it's because of all the decades of driving has lent itself to having this mindset to be able to plan that far in advance. But it's what's really honed my craft to excel in efficiency.
What's your fleet right now? What's your fleet average on fuel efficiency? If you was to say, over the last 30 days, what would be that number?
It's not the best.
What
It
is
has
not the
been
best in your
sub-zero
what is
in our
not the
part of the
best
country.
in your eyes? What's not the best of Jamie? Because you're talking, you're talking about 10, 11 miles
It-
per gallon. So what's not the best?
yeah, 7.8 is the fleet average right now, but we're doing a lot of idling. It's brutally cold. I don't have the truck guys shut the trucks off when it's sub-zero like that. It's just, to me, it's always a health risk. The truck might start the next day, but it might not. And guys are in sub-zero temperature, you could die quickly. So I don't look at it that way. Um, when things are good, our fleet average can easily get up into the eights, in the mid eights.
And so so you think about that, and we just talked about the numbers behind efficiencies. And I don't, if you ran your fleet at 8 and then had to run your fleet at 6.5, that's going to make a big difference at the bottom end of the day. And you talked about, what, you got to do a better job of trip planning. And you talked about everything from traffic flow. You talked about having that plan in advance. For the listeners on today's talk, what would you suggest, if you, from a trip planning perspective, what are some of those things that you, as the owner operator, or if you're managing a fleet, what are those things that you need to put out in front of you to better trip plan? What are some of those key components of trip planning that you do every time to make sure that you're doing the best job of making sure your trucks are optimally planned when it comes down to routing?
You got to be a geek, for the math of it. You know what I mean? Like you got to. It's caring. You know what I mean? It's pouring your heart into it. I know that as drivers, we can. The task of driving is relatively simple. It's a simple job. It doesn't require a lot of brain power, especially if you've done it as long as I have. The job itself has become too simple. And maybe that's why I have a passion for it. I throw my heart into all the little things outside of the driving task, planning out, okay, I'm X amount of miles away from where I need to be. How fast do I need to go to get there in time? Well, I'm going to be going through Chicago. What time am I going to hit Chicago? Well, that could throw a monkey wrench into it for sure. I start planning that out. I start looking at fuel along the way. Well, if I stop here, it might be 2 cents cheaper, but it's on the opposite side of the road, and they tend to be really busy. Now it's 2 cents more expensive across the street, but I can get in and out quicker at that one. So it's all these weird little efficiencies that you kind of plan out, but there again, I've been across the country so many times, I really don't even need a map anymore. You know, it's just one of those things that if you're going to own a fleet, it even gets more difficult because you have to help those guys that don't. I've got 3 young men that work here that aren't seasoned vets. They don't. They ask me quite frequently, what would you do in this scenario? I try to give them the best advice I can, but it's just going to take time of them sort of learning the craft. And I'm hoping I'm pushing on the passion to do those things, those little things, is what I really want to teach them.
So, Jamie, you talked about that from an efficiency standpoint. And when you think about the efficiencies, you had it already spec, your equipment was already specced out. As a fleet owner, as a business owner, were there any additional things that you did to make sure that you were able to optimize your fleet, whether it's additional add ons post delivery of picking up your equipment? What are the things that you added onto your truck to say, you know what, not only we're going to have the standard stuff, but we're going to take it up another notch in terms of making sure that we have the most fuel efficient and efficient equipment as possible?
We do a few things right out of the gate with a new truck. We'll take and put a air dog fuel preparator. So that thing takes out the air out of your fuel system. Your fuel injectors do not like air at all. So not only are you saving on your injectors by removing that air out of the system, but you're adding a little positive pressure to the fuel pump. So your fuel pump is gear driven. So the more RPMs you have, the more pressure you get from your fuel pump. But at the lower RPMs where you're just starting to accelerate, you're not getting a lot of fuel pressure there. So this thing, as a secondary system, will add positive pressure to your fuel rail on the top of your injectors. So it gives you a nice little horsepower increase at the low RPM range, where typically your turbo's still trying to spool up and everything. It really helps you light foot use your truck and to get more efficiency as it's coming up the RPM band. The other thing we do is we do a lot of flow below system, wheel covers, also the fins off the back of off the truck. We add the other thing is mechanical resistance. We had a Spicer come out with this incredible lube that they can put in the rear axles. Especially in the wintertime, that axle fluid gets really cold. It's harder for that axle to churn through it. This stuff is so nice and light. It just throws it around. It's a huge savings if you took a truck in the winter and then added this stuff. You can actually measure the fuel efficiency off of that, and that's just fluid. Like, so that's a no-brainer as well. We do that. We have our wheel bearings adjusted on all axles. Most people don't understand how axles work and how the manufacturer builds them, but they just use a crush cone. They just slam that thing on there with enough pressure to make sure it always stays on there, and then they move on. So every axle wheel end is either got, you know, 50 pounds of pressure on it or it's got 250 pounds of pressure on it. They don't know. They just, run them down the assembly line. So we have it actually set by a doctor preload, which is they take all that crush cone out of there, they put the bearing back on, they put an actual locking nut on there, and then they measure it and make sure you have the exact amount of pressure on every single one of them. And it makes a huge difference. If you jack that tire up and you spin it without that doctor preload on there, that wheel will go around maybe once and come to a stop. That tells you how much resistance you're actually fighting against. This thing, you can, after you've done it perfectly, it'll just sit there and go around like a roulette wheel, just over and over. And that just tells you how much freer you've made your vehicle. So it's always little tiny things that gain you just like a little tenth here and a little tenth there. Next thing you know, you're getting a half a mile to 3/4 of a mile difference with just these add-ons. So, and if you've already spec'd a fuel efficient truck, like you're just multiplying it.
That's huge too, because if you look at it, if you were to say, if you're an owner operator goes out to do just like what you talked about, the air dog, putting fairings out on the side of the truck, wheel cap covers, making sure the rear seal is greased. What are you looking at out of pocket for just, I'm an owner operator. I'm hearing what you're saying, and I want to do that too. I've got a truck and trailer. What am I expecting to come out of pocket with?
Well, first, I would say the best place to do this at is my guy at Michigan MD Alignment there in Allen, Michigan, Jim Fowler. He specializes in efficiencies. So if you show up at his place, he's going to he can optimize your truck front to back. But he does all these things. Now, if you're an owner operator and you can do this whole stuff yourself, you can save yourself quite a bit of money doing that. We're talking with the flow below, maybe $3,000, $4,000. And your return on investment is within a year. By the end of the year, you've got your money back.
And the thing about that is these are all just small, simple adjustments. Like you said, along the line, it's a tenth here, a third here. When you talk about efficiency, the most important thing about efficiency is that every little bit that you can add is going to be a benefit to you. And when you talk about fuel efficiency, there's two components when it comes down to fuel efficiency, right? You got station selection and you got consumption. Those are the two things that drive fuel efficiency the hardest. You got the consumption piece pretty much down pat. Talk to me a little bit about that station selection. You talked a little bit about the trip planning process. Is there any elements into that station selection component that you focus on to make sure that you're driving down the overall expense side of fuel costs?
Well, a good fuel card is huge. Making sure you're not paying pump price. Nobody out there should be paying pump price. It's an inflated price that truck stops do. I'm sure they catch a certain amount of people, but these huge fleets, they don't pay that price, and neither should you. You might not get as good a deal as them, but you can get darn close. There's a lot of fuel cards out there that, I can mention. There's, NASTC, the National Association of Small Trucking Companies, has one. RXO has a really good one. Uh, Enterprise Diesel, which is one we just went to, they do a really great job, but you can track all that stuff on an app. welcome to modern society where you can look on an app and I can fuel forecast my stops, not only on my route the next day, they even give us tips on like is fuel going up the next day? Like it might jump 15 cents overnight. Not a big number, but still if you're into the nickels of the business, you know what I mean? That adds up. So I always kind of trip plan that. Like I said, I'll even trip plan whether or not something is in a good area to get in and out of because you'll spend what you could save going to a bad truck stop that might take you an hour to get in and out of. It's on the opposite side, up a hill, down all kinds of weird things you got to do to get out of it. I mean, those truck stops exist. You know, so I try to trip plan even from that. Looking at the where the station is and how to get in and out of it is efficient.
No, I love that, and I love the fact that you said you got to be a geek and you got to be focused on every little nickel. And you even talked about like when you trip planning, it's not just about trip planning. Hey, just for today, it's okay. I've got this. I've got a little bit of insight that fuel might spike up in the next day or so by 15 cents. Which you're talking about 200 gallons. That's a difference. It might spike up a little bit. You know what? I'm gonna get my drivers a fuel up tonight before we get that spike, so that way we can save that. We'll be topped off, and we'll alleviate that exposure to it. So that's the reason why those two components are so important. And from an efficiency perspective, station selection and overall consumption are the two things that drive your biggest variable expense, just hands down from that perspective. So really, really glad that you hit on that. You talked about that cost savings. Now I want to walk a little bit over to your fleet size now. And so, how many trucks are you running right now?
We have 9 and we have another leased on operator, so 10 altogether.
So you're running 10 trucks, and then you talked about, hey, you know what? I've got a broker that comes out to me, and this is all part of the efficiency side of it because now we're able to help improve our income as well as control expenses. I want to just hit on it just a little bit because you talked about that from a quick perspective. What did that relationship, how did you formulate that relationship with that particular brokerage firms that works directly with you? What did that relationship formulate out of? Did it start off, hey, I booked a load on a load board and all of a sudden we became best friends, or just tell me, walk us through that process because I thought that was very, very fantastic, especially because you got 10 trucks running.
Yeah, that's typically how it came to pass, if you will. They booked a load with them, excelled at making sure communication was key the whole way through, making sure it got delivered on time and with a smile the best we can. I try to make guys smile here. Either start them off with a joke in the morning or not, but you want them to show up with the customer happy, and that's what we're trying to do is get there and make sure that they're representing us right. So the broker typically gets, they hear back from the customer on both ends, how it went and everything, and then they'll reach back out to us and they'll be like, "Hey, we have this again," and that's when I turn on, this amazing charm of mine and try to sell them on the fact that we're going to do that every time. We might not be 100%, but we're going to be 99%. Like we're going to do everything we can, and every once in a while, it's trucking. Something's going to break. The weather's going to hit you, somebody's going to have a bad day and be sick. Anything can happen. I've always said that trucking is a service. That's all you're selling is a service because it's a human being behind the truck. The truck is a tool. It's the person behind the wheel that's doing it. And those are the people that you got to like really stand behind and really sell on. I got to sell on my people. The truck's going to get the job done, but it's those guys and my guys. I've got some of the best guys. I got to admit, we've got an incredible team. It's taken a while to get there, but it's helping us hand over fist that in that relationship building. We now have been in the industry 5 years, and I don't typically have to call for work. They call us for work. So that's really helping, and that I can't stand behind my guys enough on that. It's not me. I'm just one guy. It's all of them that are doing the work and really selling it. So
Man, that is just outstanding, and I love to hear those culture sides of it, where you built a culture and you established a culture. And I see you guys all over social media. And it's not just you; it's your drivers are posting about Hellbent Express out there. You've got there's a lot of pride, man. There's a lot of pride in your fleet, and you and Hillary have done an amazing job on really just getting that pride out into the front. Now, I wanted to commend you on that. That's something that's inspirational to all. I want to do a little exercise for you though, because I really want to help the owner operators and the fleet owners, or the drivers on this call that want to be owner operators. I want to help them. I want to do an exercise with you really quick. So what I'm going to do, you got to start all over again. You have no trucks, you have nothing. You got to start all the way from ground zero. Based on what you learned, we're going to walk through step by step on how the right way to build a company and what you would do if you had to do it all over again. So, step one, what would be the first thing that you would do if you're going to start a trucking company today?
Well, I feel like I have the cheat code now that I know how to do it, and survived it. So it's almost unfair. Um, because I could literally do it today. Like if I lost everything, I even told my wife that, when things were looking their bleakest, I'm like, we'll just start over. And I know exactly how to do it now. Like I'll just walk up. Here's what I'm right away. I'm going to start an LLC, get my stuff together on that. I'm going to make sure I got a little money in the bank. You don't need a lot of money to start with one truck, but you need a little bit of money. You shouldn't start from zero. If you're deeply in debt, you're sort of starting with a limp. Yeah, you're going to start running, but you got a little bit of a limp. And I don't know if that's going to help you or not. It can be done. It's trucking. After all, trucking is built off of you can work yourself almost out of anything and work yourself to death. You know what I mean? Trucking will give you enough rope to hang yourself. You know what I mean? Like, but the first thing I would do, a little bit of money, start an LLC. I'd immediately go find a great truck for the value. It doesn't have to be a Mack truck. There's plenty of Freightliners. There's all kinds of trucks out there, Volvos that would do a great job. But I would find a really good spec truck from a good fleet. Get a good price on it, especially right now. Like you can get some incredible deals right now on equipment. Um, Go out and get my own trailer or at least two accompanied, depending on what you want to do there. But if you want to strike out on your own, um, start cheap and run as efficient as you can in the beginning. Like just operate on a shoestring budget. Your insurance is probably going to absolutely kill you right now. The insurance world is just brutal. So you don't want new equipment. You don't want fancy equipment because the more expensive it is, the more you got to pay for insurance on top of it. That's another added expense. And then right out of the gate, I'm going to try to, focus on my maintenance, focus on my efficiencies. The maintenance is going to be making sure the truck runs. You know what I mean? You want to make sure that truck is always running. And that is the hardest part when you're an owner operator because your job doesn't end when the wheels stop. As a company driver, it's not my problem, right? Well, now when you're an owner operator, it's 100% your problem. And you want to know the little things. You want to be able to do those little things that yeah, you can pull into a TA or a Love's and have them change your fill filter, but you could do it, you know, go to Napa and buy that same filter for 20 bucks. Truck stop selling it for 40 bucks. They got to make money too. They got all that land that people park on for free. They got to pay for it somehow, right? But I can go to Napa, get a filter, change it myself. Oil changes you can do really cheaply yourself too. I mean, there's all these little tiny things you can do on your own that aren't complicated. Even some of the sensors that fail on trucks these days are easy to replace. And you can buy a tool to actually reset the computer after you replace the sensor. So there's all these little things that you could do, but it would be to just focus on it, like and make it my 100%, like it's my hobby. To me, trucking is my hobby. I really, he's mentioned golf. I just tried to attempt to golf my first time this last year. So, at 51 years old, I'm out there finally learning to golf. But prior to that, trucking was 100% everything I did. Like I came home at night and I did paperwork. I followed up on it, and I would think about it going down the road even. You got all that free time. Why not listen to some audio books, some podcasts like this? God, if I would have had a podcast like this, 15 years ago, listening to this, that, like I said, it's like a cheat code. You know what I mean? Just knowing what I shouldn't have done. I've learned so much failing forward. You know what I mean? That you hear the people say that, but that's exactly how I learned. I made mistakes all day long, and learned expensive mistakes. But once you pick up all these efficiencies, the money starts rolling in. You're able to bank the money. And now you're able to. I started that second truck literally, I'm not making a joke, with my fuel efficiency. That money I literally just put aside. And next thing you know, I've got 30 grand in the bank. Within a few years, I had 30K saved up. And I'm like, all right, now I'm going to go buy a truck. And I didn't want a big truck payment. So we started off with a used truck. And, you put money down on it. Now I got payroll. So checks don't start rolling in right away, but payroll does. So now I'm paying people. You know what I mean? Like all that stuff starts kind of accumulating right away. You got to have that money in the bank. Now I got 2 trucks. Within 6 months, I realized like, hey, this is working out good. I think I got a grip on it. I went to 3 trucks. And that's when I got humbled and learned a lot of lessons there too, because if one or two of those trucks are down, you've got 3 truck payments. And you can't have a truck empty at that point. Like right now, if I have a truck empty, I can kind of survive it. The other ones will kind of pull the weight. But man, when you're 3 trucks, oof, there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that little area. So it was all those little efficiencies that I learned. Now looking back at it, I'm like, man, like that really is what saves a guy.
I love that because you're especially the story about your fuel efficiency paying for that second truck, and just the whole point is that in this industry you got thin margins. Every percentage point that you can add to the bottom line is something that you can pack away and you can win from, and it's just been just an incredible episode. Really kind of learning from you and what you're doing to really excel at that. You talked about your biggest wins. One of your biggest wins was bringing Hillary to the team and having her handle some of those things that behind the scenes that really exploded the growth. You talk about your biggest losses. You spoke very, very candidly about that and provided some really, really good insights. I always like to end the show with a little fun little exercise that I do. And in this exercise, I'm just going to give you a 1 or 2 word phrase. And out of that phrase, you can only give me 1 word back. The very first thing that
This
comes
can
to
be
mind.
dangerous.
It's going to be very dangerous. So you get a 1 or 2 word phrase, and I want you to give me the very first thing that comes to mind. And you can only say 1 word as to what's come to mind. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Trucking conferences.
Good times.
Manual transmissions.
Outdated.
Broker transparency.
Oh, uh, I can see both sides of that coin, but my 1 word answer would be not needed.
Man, it has been a tremendous opportunity to sit here and talk to you, Jamie. I've watched your journey for quite some time. And I don't know if these words mean anything, but I'm proud to watch your journey and proud to watch your growth in the industry. Very inspirational story. I love the family-owned business that you have. Love what you're doing up there. And I wish you massive success. I want to see that 10 truck operation turn into a 110 truck operation at some point. So if there's anything that we can do to help from that perspective, I'd love to continue to watch the journey and cheer from the back end. So appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, that wraps it up for another episode of The Long Haul, where you were given some extremely actionable tips from an owner that's actually out there doing it, has been able to scale his fleet, and you heard it from him. Off of fuel efficiency alone, he was able to buy a tractor. Take those things that you learned today, execute on those things that you learned, and I'm looking forward to the next episode. Take care, and we'll see you on the next one.